All right. Thank you, everybody, for having patience. Reporting out of the closed session, we gave direction to staff. And welcome again to the regular meeting, the November 12, 2020 Board, Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District. President Chris Deppe, I'll call roll. Director Sheriff Swat.
Here.
Director Natoli.
Here.
Director Badavi.
Here.
Director Hassai.
Here.
And President Chris Deppe, and obviously I'm here. So thanks again. Before we start, just a brief reminder of the Zoom protocol. If you wish to speak, this is for the board panelists, raise your hand. I'll call on you. And as I said, it's really the only way to keep conversations intelligible. You don't want to talk over someone else. It just keeps the conversations a little better ordered. And I realize it's actually part of our policy manual. It's policy 4160.2.1, actually 4160.2, obtaining the floor. I'll just read it, 4160.2.1. Any director desiring to speak should address the president, and upon recognition by the president may address the subject under discussion. So it's just good practice, and it actually is our policy. So thank you. I'll now allow the general public to make comments on items not on the agenda, but under the jurisdiction of the district. And let's see, do them in order. All right. Well, all right. Elaine, you should be able to talk if you unmute yourself. There you go.
Oh, thank you very much. I didn't intend to have my hand raised, but I appreciate you calling on me, and it was just an error.
Okay, well, welcome.
Thank you.
No, just wait a second, let me get our hand down. All right. Linda.
Hi there, everybody.
Hi, Linda.
Linda Lipscomb speaking as a grateful citizen, and I will be talking a little bit later regarding the past, but I wanted to give many thanks to Officer Ted Foley for his help in assisting an elderly resident who had fallen down in her locked home. We couldn't get in, and Officer Foley came right away, and he had to break a door in order for us to gain access to the resident, and was quickly and ably assisted by AMR personnel who stabilized the lady and got her to the hospital. Things turned out well in the end, thankfully. Officer Foley also mentioned that he would do a little bit of extra patrolling until the door was repaired, and that was done the next day. He could not have been more helpful. And one of the AMR representatives left a jacket behind. He saw to it that the jacket was returned. So many thanks to our Kensington Police, and in particular to Officer Ted Foley. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Linda. All right. Catherine Deniergard.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to express the hope, which was just reflected in what President Chris Deppe just said, of having more cordial discussions by the board, discussing various points of view and hearing various points of view. As you know, I'm particularly sensitive to the board minority member, and I'm not trying to make a pun, but you know, the person has seemingly been left out of things, both being more included and more everybody being in the loop of the flow of information. So I hope that situation can continue to improve. And just a couple of other comments. When I got an email notification of this meeting by the board secretary, I'm not sure if her her formal title. It just was a link to download something, and I have difficulty with downloads. I noticed that we can look at the agenda on the website, and I don't understand why she couldn't just send the agenda link to download something. I'd rather have a link to the website where you could look at the agenda, that rather than a link to download something. And also, I was also looking around in the police section of the website, and was charmed by a number of things in it. For example, we now can make compliments as well as complaints to the police. But there wasn't any. We used to have the crime stats by leadership position. Like, I guess there were 3 shifts, or I can't remember the right word, and then there'd be what crimes occurred. This was under Chief Harmon that he did this. And even though there is a series of reports, the reports are sort of, it's not summarized. And so there's a great deal of words that aren't very specific about what's going on. So I would like to see some sort of monthly summary of crime stats. Now, I don't think it needs to be by beat or by leadership, but just overall, that would be very helpful.
All right, thank you. All right. Danielle Madugo.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, excellent. I'm Danielle Madugo. I live on Highland, and I wanted to report a concerning incident a Kensington resident experienced while reporting the recent East Bay mud vehicle fire and PG&E pole fire this past Monday. My friend lives near the corner of Highland and Cowper and was alerted to the smoke by her children, who happened to go out for a walk and see the smoke. She and her husband immediately dialed 911 and had issues reporting the fire. After giving her address, the dispatcher realized that she was in Kensington and not in whatever territory the dispatcher represented. That dispatcher then transferred her to someone in Contra Costa who said they were the police dispatch and that they didn't dispatch fire cases. That dispatcher routed her to the Kensington Police non-emergency line, which nobody answered, and gave a recording to call 911 in the case of an emergency. Then the previous dispatcher came back on the line and apologized that that was the only number she had for Kensington. That dispatcher then rerouted her to Berkeley Fire, who, as soon as she stated her location, said they already had an engine on the way, and abruptly hung up. She placed her call 2 minutes after the call was recorded in the Contra Costa Fire dispatch log that I see on my pulse point, and told me that she was never directed anywhere that identified themselves as Albany or El Cerrito. I thought this was extremely concerning, that wherever her cell phone was routed, the answering dispatch did not know to send her to either Albany or directly to Contra Costa Fire. She did say that she had called Kensington PD about traffic issues at that corner later, and she did relay some of her story to a police officer who responded to that. But I just wanted to bring it to the board's attention, because that's absolutely concerning that somebody would want to report the fire and was completely rerouted. And her husband also had issues as well. So that's it. Thanks.
All right, thank you. I'm sure Walter, maybe Bill can look into that.
Can I ask a clarifying question? I heard you say she used her cell phone. Is that correct?
Yes,
Probably.
she used her cell phone.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm
Yeah,
sure that's part of the problem.
Just to
It
say,
is.
it's a huge problem, and we'll perhaps the board at a Bill, we need to. It's not a problem for the caller. It's a problem for all cell phone users. We've discussed it casually, but there may need to be an information campaign now that more and more people don't have landlines and don't use them, but
I am
It's-
one of those. We have
it's a
only cell
difficult
phones in our
problem.
house.
yeah, it's a terribly difficult problem because you're routed outside of the service area often. Anyway, I'm sure Bill and Walter are more than qualified to answer this question, and we can talk about it.
I think Eileen wanted to add something.
Yeah, we used to have on our website that for emergencies with cell phones, call the police dispatch number, not 911. And that's to get around the problem with cell phones calling 911.
I can make a
I
real
would-
brief comment
We'll
about.
let the chief speak.
Go ahead, Chief.
Okay, so I was aware of this problem that a couple of residents were having, so we delved into it and we found out, we called CHP. I contacted the area commander and talked to him personally. I made sure that he had Albany PD's dispatch number. I also told him about the problem. He said he was going to provide training, roll call training to the dispatchers so they transfer to the right fire department. I also said Kensington PD also responds to fires because the vast majority of police departments do not respond to fires, but due to the high hazard that Kensington has for fires, he will also tell the dispatchers to notify Albany PD, so we are also notified. So he said he was going to do this training right away. Hopefully that'll alleviate some of the problems. The problem is with cell phones is that if they ping on the wrong cell tower in our area, they won't go to Albany Dispatch, they will go to CHP. So when CHP gets the call, it's up to the dispatcher to transfer them to the right location. So hopefully with this and with a little public outreach, we'll be able to alleviate most of these problems.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Joanna Furman. You should be able to unmute yourself, Joanna. Oh, let's try it again. There you go. Johanna, you're alive? Hello? We're not hearing anything. I'll come back to you later if you're still wanting to talk. All right. Kyra Milik?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Ken.
I just was unclear from the prior person's very alarming comments about trying to reach the fire department in the event of a fire. What number are we supposed to call? Because all I have is a cell phone. I don't have a landline. So I'm not clear what number I'm supposed to call if a fire happens.
The dispatch number is 510-525-7573. Anytime you need an officer from Kensington, call that number. Don't call the office. You need an officer for anything. Call that dispatch number because of COVID. Somebody may not answer the phone at the office and it could sit there for hours or maybe even overnight.
Okay, so
call
that's
that number for anytime you need an officer,
police or fire.
police or fire.
Oh, and my husband just handed me the magnet, which was on our refrigerator. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. All right, let's try Johanna Furman once more. Johanna? We're not hearing anything if you are talking. We see your picture, but we don't hear anything. All right, well. Wait a second. And I see, Linda, you have your hand still raised, but we only allow one person or one comment per person per period. But feel free to say something later in one of the other sections. Hopefully you can relate it. Anybody else? No? All right. Next item is board staff communication, general manager's report. So Bill, you're up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually really don't have a formal report this evening, other than what's on the agenda later on, where I'll be adding to the agenda report. But I will be glad to answer any questions from the board members or public.
I have some questions. I just would like to know the status of a couple of things. A lot of residents have pointed out the weeds at the lot at Coventry and Arlington, and I was wondering when that might be attended to. There were reports that the sprinkler above the tennis court needs repair. There are also reports that there are no lights in certain areas of the park at night. And I'm wondering the status of removing the damaged oak tree above the tennis courts. And also just interested in any success with the dome tops for the garbage containers in the park.
Long list. All of those things are being addressed in one form or another. I actually have a walkthrough scheduled with some of our maintenance contractors to go over these items. And one of the things that I do want to come back with at your December meeting is some more formal and specific contracts for maintenance of the park and common areas, because at least my observation as an interim manager here is that there seems to be a bit of a gap there in the services. So we will try to shore those up and get to those things that are on the list. Some of those have been taken care of, but the sprinklers, for example, that was a stuck valve. That was not a long-term issue, but we need to do this on a regular, systematic basis, and that's something that I want to come back with to the board in December.
Thanks, Bill.
All right. Would you like to take questions from the public, Bill?
I'd be glad to.
Does anybody in the public have a question for? Oh, well, wait a second. I'll get back to you, Cyrus. Let me just make sure that. Well, we got a couple of them. Then let's go to you, Cyrus, first, so we can take care of the board stuff. Go ahead, Cyrus.
I was just sort of wondering what happened to the auditor, because we were told the auditor contract would be provided and posted, but that sort of disappeared and there's nothing on the website.
I believe it's out to the auditor for signature.
Okay, so we're still waiting on that.
I believe so.
That's right. It's been sent to the auditor for signature. We did sign the engagement letter. As soon as that comes back, we'll post both of those on the agenda.
Okay.
Or, I'm sorry, on the website.
All right. Now we'll go to the public. Meryl?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Bill, why it is that we can't see who attends the meeting. What is the purpose of that, and can that be changed?
Yeah, I guess you weren't there in the first part. We use something called a webinar, Zoom webinar, because it closely, or the best matches the layout of a physical meeting where we've got panelists, which are the board, we've got members of the public coming and asking. And the Zoom webinar doesn't have the option to show the members of the public, the attendees. I can show the number, but there is no way with a webinar to show who attends. So
well, there is a way to have a normal Zoom meeting and just spotlight the board attendees. That's another option you might consider.
Yeah, if we wanted to have a meeting, but I find that the webinar is much better for the board issues, but it's an option. But that's the reason. All right. Catherine, in your yard?
Yes, I'm going to carry that out a little further and ditto Merrill, because I go to a lot of Zoom meetings that have like the main presenters like you all, and then other people, you can see their pictures, but they can only speak if they're unmuted by the facilitator, so that you don't have anything invasive, but you do see the pictures of the other people at the meeting. And I would like that. Because yeah, it would be great to do that. And it's called something else, but in effect, you would still all be there as the co-hosts, if that makes sense. And your pictures would be at the beginning also on the first page. And I guess I'm going to repeat my question. Could we have a monthly crime stats report? I don't know if this is a question for Bill or for Chief Schuld.
You know, it's really a question for both of us, and I can work with the chief on that and make sure that that becomes a standing item.
To be in the on the website, so people can, members of the public. Great.
All right, thank you. All right. Lynn?
Thank you very much. I wanted to follow up on the question about the attendees. Could we at least know how many attendees there are this evening?
Well, you should be able to see that. Let me check something. Let's see. Where is it? Oh, here we go. Oh, I did it for the first one. That should be fixed now.
So where am I going to see it?
I have a different interface than you, but it does say allow attendees to view the participant account. So if you click around, you should be able to see it. It's enabled. But again, I've got a totally different interface than what you have, so I can't say.
I'm not able to see it. So could you please let us know how many attendees there are?
Right now there's 48.
48. Okay. And then in sort of connecting to the request for police stats, could we also please resume seeing the profit and loss statement on a monthly basis? The QuickBooks version of the unaudited P&L that used to be provided monthly. And then lastly, I'd really like to thank Cyrus for his following up on the status of the auditor's contract. The engagement letter was missing from the agenda when that was reviewed, and it's very unusual not to see an engagement letter when the board is hiring one of its 3 hires, and the auditor, the general manager, and legal counsel are the only 3 people the board hires, and to have been absent the agreement was very unusual. Thank you. I can jump in with a quick thing. Local government doesn't have profit and loss statement. We don't create any profit and loss because we don't make a profit. We're local government. So we do have expense reports and details, and those the finance committee are producing quarterly, and we may, as soon as we can replace the wonderful Catherine Corsick, we'll maybe be able to get those monthly, but right now they'll be on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, there is a plan to get them on the agenda monthly. We just, I think we did September last month, and then October for the first meeting in November is not ready because the books are not closed yet for November. So you'll see those in the following month.
All right, thanks. Bill Benson.
I had a quick question, actually.
Um,
Is
can
there
I-
anything
well,
precluding us from seeing the
can you just
unaudited?
let Bill speak and then. Go
Actually,
ahead, Bill.
Mabry speaking.
I was wondering about that.
I'm not happy with this Zoom setup. I think some people saw my earlier email this afternoon about it. I tried phoning in 9 times between 7:30 and 8, and finally a minute or two after 8, and I kept putting in the number. And finally they said, this webinar doesn't exist. Well, then we got done with the concert we were listening to, and my husband brought it up on the desktop. Well, I see I've missed the beginning of the meeting. I don't know what you reported out from your closed session. I think if you say you're going to start a meeting at 7:30, then you need to interrupt your special meeting and get this started, or at least tell people that we'll be here at 7:45 or 8 or something. But for me to have to dial 9 times, as you can tell from my voice, I'm quite irritated. Thank you.
All right. I think I might, let's see. I'm gonna try something because I think, boy, it's lighting up. Daniel, did you want to talk?
Actually, no, sorry. I
Okay.
thought my hand was on, but I did have a question. I had the fire number, the dispatch number 525-7573. I have that in my cell phone as a non-emergency Kensington dispatch. Do you think you guys can clarify to me which number I need to call?
If you don't want to call 911 from your cell phone, go ahead and call that number, and that'll get a dispatcher.
For emergencies or non-emergencies?
You can do it for both.
Okay, thanks.
Cyrus, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was wondering, like, because yes, I know P&L expense revenue, it's just the semantics of the software. But I was wondering, like, is it possible still, because sometimes we don't always have 2 meetings a month. Is it still possible to get the unaudited? Because there should not be more than a 5% difference. And if there is, at that point, there's other problems in the bookkeeping.
Well, they're not audited every month, but we close the books every month, and we don't have the information from the county until usually the 15th or thereabouts. And they so what we prefer to do is have financial statements provided to the board based on a close of the month, because then we know that they fully reflect the activity of the month. So it's a little bit later, but it's more accurate. And we can do check listings and things like that, but really they're not financial statements until really the books are closed and the accounts are reconciled.
So, is there anything the board can get? Because you don't want to be always talking about a month later when you get it. And like, whatever we send out, we should also be seeing in our book. So the reconciling should not be like tens of thousands of dollar difference, right?
That's not really the process. But if you even offline, let me know what type of financial information you'd like to see. We'd be glad to provide that to you, even if the books aren't closed. If you want to see.
Well, because I actually had been
on
asking for those things, and then you kept saying we're not going to give it until we close the books.
No, I didn't say we would not give it. I'm saying that we will put it on the agenda based on closing the month, and those are the financial statements we'd like to provide. If you want something different than that, then or the board would like something different than that, then you can let me know and we can do that.
So in other words, you're saying we're going to get last month's report every month.
That's not unusual.
I'm actually saying that the books for, and let's just take October as an example. The books for October will be closed in mid-November, mid to actually sometime between the 15th and the 20th of November, because it just the way the cycle works with the county in part, and they manage our accounts. And so to make sure that we provide accurate financial statements, we wait until the books are closed, and then we would put those on the agenda. So that's the procedure that we recommend that the board use.
So how many months behind would every report be is the question.
It actually depends in part on whether you have a second meeting, but generally what you'll do is you'll have the report somewhere between 30 and 40 days after the close of the month. So for example, your next meeting, let's see, 1, 2, 3, your next meeting is December 10th. And then you'll have closed, you'll have financial statements for a closed October on that date.
If we have a second meeting sometimes.
No, I said first meeting, December 10th, your first meeting in December, you will have financial statements for a closed month of October.
But I'm saying in other cases, if we had 2 meetings, the second meeting, we would get the information for that for the month right
Generally,
prior.
that's right. If you had a meeting December 24th, which I think is not likely, but if you did, then we would be able, I believe, to produce the financial statements for a closed November.
Okay, I mean, in other words, we're always reacting to stuff that's probably at least possibly a month or 2 behind.
Well, I don't know if you want to debate it, but I would say that what you'll be getting is accurate financial statements based on a month-end close and reconciled accounts. And I think that's beneficial to you.
Okay, I'm just trying to get a sense of the timeline here.
Yeah, and really, if the board wants to do something else, then we'll provide whatever the board whatever the board decides.
All right. Anthony. Anthony Knight, you should be able to unmute yourself. There you go. Anthony? We can't hear you if you're talking. No? All right. I'm going to go to Steve Karamia.
Thank you. I wanted to second third the comment about this Zoom meeting, this format. We live in such a small community and we're all being quarantined, and to have now 50 participants. And by the way, I can see the participants if you're not in full screen. So that's just a tip for everybody. So yeah, I would rather see my fellow Kensingtonians at this meeting rather than just the board. And you can be on page 1 and then we can all be in the other pages, but that's much more of a community meeting to me. And that's important, really important now of all times. So I would third that comment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to try Anthony Knight once more. Anthony? Still not working. All right. All right, Lynn?
Yes, I still don't understand why it is that you can't produce the unaudited, it was just the name of the report, profit and loss. I understand the organization doesn't exist to create a profit, but it's a timely report that shows every check that's been issued. And to most residents, it's more important to know how much money has been authorized to go out the door as opposed to waiting to find out how many checks have actually cleared the bank, so to speak. So this waiting creates an aura of uncertainty and sort of begs the question, why would you not want people to know the information in a timely manner as the board always had done for eons of time?
Yes, and for eons of times, months were not closed out properly. So I prefer as a board member to have the process that Bill Lindsay has laid out for us. We can have a discussion about this if we wish to as a board, but for now we have a process in place, and closing the month accurately and completely is extremely important. Thank you.
All right, so let's keep this moving. Johanna?
Are you now hearing me?
We are.
Chris, great, great. I think that several of us had some difficulty technically earlier because we had logged on and there was a delay in terms of getting onto the meeting. So I'm seeing that there are a couple of us who have had difficulty, but at any rate, I did want to go back, if that's all right, to the conversation that Danielle Mugo had raised. And you know, I think all of us recognize this is a very difficult time we're moving through, but certainly where communication is very, very critical. And obviously here we lost the electric grid, there was a fire. I had not known the details of this until hearing her. I guess my question is really to Walt, and I guess to folks on the fire side as well, as to whether we might not really get assurance that there's going to be a dry run. We were due to have a fire drill. I think it was in July. We had high winds. It was canceled. And I think all of this is telling me, and I would imagine you, that there are some issues in terms of working out some protocols that we could be assured would be working. And I am just asking how you might close the loop on this. We have a resident who's made a report. It's fairly alarming in terms of any other report that would be coming in. And most of us are on cell phones at this point. It was the first time that I've heard that there is a problem with cell phones getting rerouted.
Yes,
All right, go ahead, Walt. But I think we've talked about this a lot, but we got to keep moving. But go ahead, Walt.
Real quick about the fire drill. We actually did have a fire drill. However, the county decided on the CWS warning not to do a public warning. One, because they felt they didn't want to panic the public because maybe some people wouldn't know it was a test. Myself and the Kensington Fire complained. I talked to several people of the sheriff's office, but could not convince them to continue with that. But the responders did have a full-scale fire drill. It just, I wanted the public involved, but I didn't get my way. But we did have a fire drill, and it was completed. As far as the cell phone, I think the cell phone it has been addressed. I don't know what more we could do on the cell phone end of it.
All right, thank you. So you're officially next, police chief report. I don't know if you need to say anything else.
Just really quickly, I wanted to just say I did have a quarterly meeting with Albany PD Chief Geisberger about our dispatch. We took very quickly, there's new DOJ requirements that we have to scramble our police radio system for privacy concerns. We discussed that and e-bricks and what the cost is going to be for that. But we have no details on that because e-bricks is working on that. We discussed our teams working over to change over to Verizon. We also discussed Albany's upgrade on their cell phone system, which is pretty apropos to what we've been discussing. Better technology for cell phones. It also get a better location if they dial 911 where the person is calling for the event. They also are trying to get texting technology so that people can text their 911 into the police department. And that should be January or February of next year. So, and lastly, the only other thing is that I'm very happy with Albany Dispatch. They've been doing a great job. That's all.
All right, thank you. I see we have one public comment, but we need to keep moving. So Johanna, if it's, keep it brief, please. Hello?
My hope is that next time around you won't mute me so that we can have a conversation. What I'm saying is that you're doing a lot of work, and I think the communication issue is paramount. Listening to this as a resident, I still don't have a sense of what I would do and how that would work. And it would have me feeling a lot better, given that we've lived through ash-filled skies, if I knew exactly how to handle my cell phone, where you are in the process. That's really all I'm asking. I have no more at this point. Thanks so much. And thank you, Walt. You've been doing a tremendous amount of very good work.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's go to Board of Directors communications. Does anybody have anything they wish to communicate?
I just want to thank Bill for taking care of some issues in the park with lighting brought up by a resident, and they were addressed. So thank you. And also the bathrooms are operational and open now, correct? Great. So that's something
That
else.
is correct. And cleaned and disinfected every day.
Thank you.
All right, it looks like someone came at the very end. Elaine, go ahead. Elaine. No? All right. Once more. All right, then we'll move on. Let's move on to the consent calendar. Consider approval of the minutes for the board meeting of October 22nd, 2020, and the special meeting of November 6th, 2020. Let's just see if there's any public comments first. No. Do any board members want to poll either items?
I just have a quick correction on the October 22nd minutes.
Okay.
On page 3, the item talking about review financial statements for the quarter ending September 30th. At the very end of that paragraph, it's saying, additionally, Director Natoli asked about the funding for a 115 trust for CalPERS payments and one for retiree medical. The word "and" should be replaced like "the." because we have a 115 trust for retiree medical. So again, that's and the word "and" should be replaced with like the.
Anyone else have any corrections? All right, then, do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent calendar.
I'll second the motion
With
The
friendly amendment.
corrections, with the corrections made by Director Natoli to strike the word and replace with like the in the October minutes.
I concur.
Okay. Take a roll call. Cyrus?
Aye.
Rochelle?
Yes.
Sylvia?
Yes.
Eileen? You need to unmute. Speak louder, Eileen. I didn't hear you.
Yes.
Okay, and I vote yes, so it's 5-0. Great. All right, onward and upward. Now, status report from the general manager about the public safety building and a consideration of scheduling a joint meeting. So Bill, you want to take this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't go into the entire background, but I will pick it up in September, just several months ago, when the staff received a new so-called option D for renovation of the public safety building, which it still hasn't been approved by either the fire department or the police department. And in particular, Chief Schuld has provided comments on the design to the architect, and the architect is more or less in a problem-solving stage now to try to incorporate those comments into a conceptual design for the building that can meet the needs of both agencies. So that work is really really more or less ongoing. I had some discussions several weeks ago with the fire district interim general manager, Mary Morris Mayorga, and we believe that the two agencies are at a point where a joint meeting of the two boards of directors might be helpful. And the agenda and the format are still a bit of a work in progress, but what we had talked about was a meeting that was really just an informational meeting so that both boards receive the same information at the same time. We've had, I think, a little bit of difficulty with the fact that there are separate presentations at separate board meetings. And I think the architect referred to it as playing telephone or post office, and where you don't get the same information all the time at the same time. We thought that it would be something just jointly facilitated by the interim general managers from both of the agencies, and give an opportunity again for an information load from the architect, overview and history of the project, the status, recommended progress on closure, the project schedule, and also a budget estimate. And finally, financing options, which we really haven't discussed yet, except in very, very general terms. And this is just meant to be sort of a tentative listing of some of the topics. Since I prepared the agenda report, and the fire board met yesterday evening, and from conversations with the interim general manager of the fire district today, she indicated that the fire board determined to hold off or just defer a little bit, determining what the next step should be until after next month's board meeting. And at that meeting, they wanted to see if they could get information from both the fire chief and the police chief on the design and what issues were still remaining. They will meet again on November 18th. Mary Morris Mayorga indicated that they wouldn't necessarily, she didn't feel like they were necessarily going to determine whether to have a joint meeting at that point, but wasn't completely sure. The fire board also indicated they wanted to close out the extra service requests. So in other words, just kind of freeze things right now for the design moving ahead until some of these design issues were resolved with both the fire district and the police, I'm sorry, fire department and the police department. So we do have, I need to talk to the architect about how that affects our extra service request to the architect, because they were doing some things that were focused really just on the police department, but by agreement with the fire district, those were split between the two agencies. So I still need to get clarity on that. So for tonight, we had recommended that you consider directing staff to schedule a joint meeting of the two boards, Fire District Board and the Community Services District Board. You may still want to do that. You may still want to signal that that's something you want to try to do. It's less time important now because the fire district has, in essence, put a bit of a hold on it. So, I leave that to your determination. If you think that having a joint meeting of the two boards is a good idea, I think there's nothing wrong with signaling your interest in doing that. The timing can be something that is driven when the two boards both make that same determination, if they make that same determination. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions that I can about where we are. I think I would say that between the architect and the staff, there's still a good working relationship, still working forward on trying to do what I described as problem solving, which I think is a great deal of architecture. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Rochelle, do you have a question?
No, actually, I was gonna jump right into my suggestion,
Okay, yeah.
which is that it sounds kind of like that perhaps that this is on hold. I agree with Bill. I'm happy to have him move forward with the meeting between both boards. But I mean, I think you need to present, more information. So I don't know if this is something we just want to table until next month.
Does anybody else have ideas, Cyrus?
Well, I don't know, because I went to the meeting and listened, and it sounded like the architect was like, oh, whatever the police district does is what the police district does. Though I sort of agree with the fire district in that this whole thing has gotten really weird, where we have both the tenant and the landlord working with the architect, and it's not even being done in a synchronous fashion anymore. And
Well,
I was also kind of struck that the architect seemed to vacillate between some of the statements that he had said before that were absolutely necessary, and then he was designing without them, but still claiming they were necessary. The whole thing got really weird.
I mean, Bill can only, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know if
what you've heard from Mary, right?
Yeah, my information is secondhand, and you observed it firsthand. So I will say that in just conversations with the architect as we review the plans, they've indicated that it has been it's been tough. You were working with the upstairs owner and downstairs tenant, and to trying to meet the needs of both of the potential occupants. That it's been challenged. But I would say that they've been doing a good job trying to deal simultaneously with both agencies, and as well as they, I don't want to say as well as they can, but I would say they've been doing a pretty good job with that, and have acknowledged that it's a difficult task.
I mean, it's borderline conflict of interest, and it's like, it's, as you said, it's telephone. And so this has kind of gone to the point where there's so much entropy involved in the process. And frankly, for an architect that talks about best standards, he sure made a bunch of mistakes that are rookie-like.
In terms of the police department design, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I won't say it that way, but what I'll say is that the police chief, Chief Schull, did a good job pointing out where there were some things that were really necessary to the operations of the department, and the architect has some work to do on that.
But yeah, so I mean, they've closed out their engagement, and I'm sort of getting to the point too where it's like, this whole thing with this architect has also gotten thoroughly, it's no longer normal.
Well, I think the issue before is, yeah, I mean, that's,
I was going to say, this is probably not a normal type of design. And I think the architect has said that. So I was going to say something like, I don't know if it ever was normal, but I think it's been challenging. I think that it's hard to design for the two agencies in a fixed footprint. And and that was part of the reason for the joint meeting, again, to try to get the two boards to hear the information in the same form and fashion.
But yeah, I guess it's kind of gotten odd now that the fire district has pretty much closed out their relationship for the time being. Though it is warming that like they are wanting to hear from both the chiefs at their own meeting, so that's a start. I assume we don't need to give permission for the chief to go if he wants.
Well, actually, I think I'm actually fairly sensitive to that, because the fact of the matter is that the police chief works for this board and needs to represent your interests. By the same token, I think that he needs to be candid both with you and with the architect about where he thinks there are some deficiencies in the design. But my preference, frankly, would be not to have the two chiefs go to one board, but have the two chiefs go to both boards at the same time and provide that kind of review.
That is my preference too.
I would take a little bit different approach to it than they would, but that's something for them to consider.
I mean, that would be my preference too, but I'm saying hopefully we can start to work from at least there.
Yeah.
so I guess the decision is, do we want to sort of give a blanket approval for a joint meeting and so if they ever do agree to it, then we don't have to come back to our board. I mean, I wasn't at the meeting, so I don't know, Bill, do you think, does that make sense, or is it something that we should just put off until we get more information from what they're thinking?
If I were to, I think if this board has an interest in a joint meeting, and if you think it would be fruitful, I don't think there's any problem with signaling your interest in doing that at this point, because then they at least have that part of it answered.
All right.
So I guess I make a motion that
Cyrus, sorry, there's some public that needs to comment.
I also would like to say something.
Okay, well, why don't you go ahead, Sylvia?
Well, I mean, I guess it just depends. It sounds like right now there's nothing to talk about. We're not quite there. So I don't think anybody, well, I personally don't think anybody would really object to a joint meeting if there were good reasons to have one. So I'm not quite sure. No one's ever objected to having a joint meeting. It wasn't the right time. There's nothing to talk about, or it wasn't far enough along in the process. So, I don't know what all that means. It just seems kind of like we're talking about something that doesn't really exist yet. In principle, is anyone opposed to, it's sort of like asking us, in principle, are we opposed to a joint meeting? I mean, if that's what they're asking, for me, the answer would be no, but I'm, not ready to fix a date until I knew what the agenda was and what the point of the meeting was. And, we're not going to discuss financing till we have a project. We don't have a project yet. So that's sort of how I think about it. So it's principle, no, but it doesn't seem appropriate at this moment in time.
All right, let me get a couple of comments from the public. Kevin.
Thank you, Chris. I'm not sure who, apart from Cyrus, on your board and your staff was able to attend the fire board meeting last night. What I'd like to report is that I think that in closing out the ticket that Cyrus referred to. And Cyrus, thank you so much for coming to our meetings. In closing out that ticket, it was simply a closeout of further expense to the board on research and conversation on something that had been authorized to a certain extent. Nothing more should be read into it than that. I think it's really important that people understand that that was simply a financial thing. Okay? I hope that can be understood by people, because it in no way expresses any intention of our board about anything related to plans or accommodation or anything else. And I really hope that the other members of this board and the staff of your district will tune in to the recording of last night's meeting once it's put up there, because we had like an hour and a half, hour and a quarter conversation with the architect, and a lot of things were brought out that we didn't understand before. And I don't think there's any point in people talking about anything until you've accessed that recording and understood what Mallory, our architect, has done. He weathered an amazing array of questions, and he handled them as usually patiently, intelligently, sympathetically. Please listen to this before you go any farther with your deliberations. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kevin. I'm assuming this is Mabry.
Correct. Mabry's here. I did listen to the fire board meeting last night. And yes, the architect gave a lot of yeah, and I totally agree with Kevin. You should all listen to certainly that part of the fire meeting to get your own take on it. The architect went over a lot of the conflicts of the space allotment between the police and the fire that he was trying to juggle, and he made a number of proposed changes. I think to give a little more space to the police, and but there's the issue of conference room and access and this, and I was a little disturbed that Sylvia was I was still thinking that we didn't have to have the elevator, but the
Excuse me,
architect.
please clarify which Sylvia you're speaking about, Mabry.
I'm sorry, the fire board chair. Is that?
You mean Julie? You mean Julie? Or do you mean
Okay.
Ellsberg?
Yeah, I do mean Julie. I do mean Julie. Sorry, I was worried that I had the wrong name there. Okay, the fire chair was still thinking we could, we'll just say, get away without an elevator, but the architect corrected her on that. Well, I'd figured that out months ago, that the county was not going to insist upon it, and that's absolutely has to be there. But my takeaway at the end of the evening was that the fire board was almost ready to throw its hands up because it was running against a real money stop there, because to try and keep it under 50% of the replacement value, well, and this was months ago, the replacement value was maybe 10 to 12 million. And at this point, the architect has a $7 million building there. Well, that's a little more than half of replacement. And at that point, this is my takeaway, that the fire just kind of threw up its hands and said, we have to put this whole thing on hold and figure out what we're doing. not just how the police and the fire were both going to fit in there, but they need to fit in there under this severe financial problem. And that's my takeaway. And I do think you should all listen to it because it's gravely going to affect it. Gail Feldman and one other person was quite disturbed that there didn't seem to be enough willingness. And I'm going to say again, this was my point of view on the part of the fire, that this is a joint building for the community. And somebody else expressed that. So that's my take on last night's meeting.
Right. Thank you. You know, this is about whether or not we should have a joint meeting. I don't want to get into a discussion about what they did or didn't say at the meeting. Well, we've got other things we have to talk about. So if you've got a comment about whether you think we should have a joint meeting or not, fine, but let's not get into a discussion about what was or wasn't said at the fire board meeting, please. All right, Delk?
Did I get unmuted?
You certainly, well, no, you didn't. I can't hear you at all. Go ahead.
All right, sorry. Well, I was just getting ready to mute myself because you said this is just about whether we should have a joint meeting or not. But since I have made some comments, please allow me to say them. I was listened to the meeting last night also. And one of the things that I think is a bit weird, that since June, options B through D has a lobby that is 105 square feet.
Delk, I'm really going to have to stop you there because it's not the agenda item. We've got a lot of things to talk about tonight. So I appreciate
Okay.
concern, but that's exactly the kind of thing that we would probably talk about at a joint meeting.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
you. Sorry to be strict about this, but. All right, Julie, I'm going to ask the same thing if you go ahead. Julie?
Oh, thank you. Sorry, my internet cable just temporarily. Can you hear me, Chris?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. My internet cable just temporarily fell out of my laptop.
When that happens.
I do want to try to stay on topic of what you're trying to resolve, but at the same time, I don't want to be misquoted by members of the public. So, you know, this was more than just a financial issue last night. It was really a decision process and, if you will, a moral and legal reckoning on the project, because what the architect essentially revealed in a set of footnotes to the fire board on July 22nd, 2020, is the fact that we are not actually required to do anything to the building. The only time you are required to meet the current code is in an area of renovation that disturbs the structure. That particular area needs to be brought up to code. The rule for voluntary seismic strengthening is that you just can't make the whole building worse. And so one of the issues that we were grappling with last night is the fact that all of the ADA upgrades are triggered by a certain minimum, by a certain threshold of value of renovation. So one of the things I asked the architect was whether anyone had actually pursued different strategies for improving the building rather than the entire sort of like do the whole thing at once for $8 million. Could there be an incremental strategy for seismic strengthening and then the programmatic upgrades that we do know that the police department needs and that the fire department needs that might allow us to avoid the need for installing the elevator? So it's not that I've been in denial about the current strategy requiring an elevator. My question was, are there other strategies that might allow us to avoid it? Because we've been in this building for 50 years without an elevator. We haven't been sued. The building's been working pretty well for us. So I just wondered how much people have kind of thought outside of the box to look at different ways to reach the end game. We also learned last night that the architect had embarked on this option D that includes enclosing the deck. And the reality is that he has not gotten a ruling from the county about whether or not we can enclose the deck. So it seems like he's kind of gotten ahead of all of us. At least he's gotten ahead of the fire board and also exceeded the value of our engagement with him. So we just had a lot of questions, and we still, we didn't decide, we didn't even get to the agenda item about the joint meeting with your board because we really had a lot of questions for the architect that have been building over time. And
Julie, can I just, I hate to cut you off, but let me then get your opinion. Do you think that the idea of a joint meeting is just premature right now? Is that what you're saying?
I can't speak on behalf of the board, Chris. I thought that the Outlook article was premature because the plans that were published were still in draft mode. And sorry, pets going on here. And in fact, are not even the current plans under consideration. I'm only speaking for myself, that I still think that a joint meeting is a good idea, but I also think it's a good idea that the fire board has kind of taken a step back from this. Because I want to elaborate on a point that Cyrus made, and I'm sorry if I'm taking up too much time.
Yeah, if you could be brief, please. We have other, and I really don't want to be strict with you, but just be concise. How's that?
I'll do my best. Cyrus brought up the point that the architect has spent quite a bit of time specifying all of these BSCC code requirements for holding cells, secure restrooms, and all these various requirements that have all of a sudden, for the police department, that have all of a sudden disappeared. So our question really was, why were we told that we had to do all these things and now we don't have to do all these things? And what is the liability of the landlord in a situation if we were to renovate this building and not meet that code? And he claimed that these were still legal requirements, but at the same time, he hasn't designed them into the current plan. So there's just kind of a lot of outstanding questions that I think both boards should be asking.
All right, well, that's thank you, and I'll listen to the meeting, I'm sure. And sorry to be strict with you, Julie.
No, I totally understand.
Right. All right, we have some more here. And Dave, again, please address the issue of the joint meeting and hopefully don't talk about what happened at the fire board last night.
Thanks, Chris. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I will go to the point, and my point being that the fire board did, I think, agree, and Julie can correct me if I'm wrong, that they would like to have both the police chief and the fire chief attend their next meeting, presumably to answer a lot of questions and get the sense of where they both are. If that is the case, then I would agree with your interim general manager, Lindsay, that the police board should also attend that meeting so that you hear the same thing from both the fire chief and the police chief. And frankly, if I were your board, I would not want to have the police chief attend without someone, one or more of your board members in attendance as well. So I would agree with the joint meeting if the fire board intends to invite both chiefs to their meeting. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Couple more. Meryl,
Yeah, I'd like to say that it seems like all this discussion is happening because this board does not attend the fire board meetings. And that rather than one joint meeting, you should at least have one representative from your board or two representatives from your board at every fire meeting, so that the information is not by telephone, it is actually being shared. It's a shared building, a shared responsibility, and an important decision. And I can't understand. I know fire board members attend the police board meeting. I don't know why more board members don't attend the fire board meeting. And if I were to make a motion or propose a motion, I would propose that at least two board members go to every fire board meeting.
is that it?
Yep.
Thank you. All right, Larry, same morning to you.
Yes, I promise to be very brief. I'm the third fire board member to speak here, and I just wanted to say, first of all, I'm not speaking for the fire board, and you guys all know that. My personal opinion is that we definitely should have a joint meeting of the two boards with the two chiefs present. And my reasoning is very simple. Personally, my own opinion is that I don't think it's worthwhile to pursue a building that both the chief of police and the chief of and the fire chief are not happy with. Do not think it satisfies their needs.
I'm sorry, I mean to jump in, but we've had 3 fire board members express their personal opinions. If
Yes.
that's not a Brown Act violation, I don't know what is, and I have to jump in. I mean, I know you're not trying to do that, but I as a board, I need to just step in because
Well,
I
I'm
like you
answering.
all, and I don't want to. It's not okay.
I
know
already
you-
said I'm not speaking for the board. I'm speaking as a.
It doesn't,
board
he's
member.
now, but 3 people giving their opinions, I can say I don't speak for the board, but I think we should, you know, if I come before your board and say, I don't speak for my board, but I think we should
Okay,
hire
I won't say anything more.
Bob Ross as our next general manager, and then 2 other board members come and say, I concur, you know, it starts to be, sorry, so our
Ann?
I was just, there's a gray area here. It is allowed to attend public meetings and speak in public, as long as you're not conferring with your colleagues out of the public eye. But doing so always raises the question of, has there been coordination, and are you reaching a consensus of the board outside of a public meeting? I generally discourage it because I think it does raise at least the appearance of a Brown Act violation, even if it's not technically one.
All right. So issue at hand, joint meeting. I'll have to say that if the fire chief and the police chief were going to be talking, I would only approve that if it were a joint meeting. I would not want Walt to be speaking at a fire board only meeting. Even if all of us were at the fire board meeting, I would want it to be at a joint combined meeting. So I do feel strong about that. Whether or not it makes sense to approve a joint meeting, it's a little, I also agree with Sylvia, if we don't know what the parameters or the format or even what we're talking about, I'm not sure what we'd be agreeing to, except sort of the in principle that, yeah, we think it's a good idea, but what are we agreeing to? So go ahead, Cyrus.
We could agree on our end, since it's like we could say that we are ready and willing whenever they have, you know, considered they're ready to get back on track on this, and that they actually want to have that information gathering. That would be probably, we're not committing them to anything, but we're saying that we've reached a point where we are happy to have that meeting and discussion when you want to begin your, you know, get back on the train.
Eileen,
I'm wondering if
staff.
staff has any comments on this, both.
Let me, I'm sorry, Cyrus. I was going to ask Eileen if she had any opinion on this.
I'm open to having a joint meeting, and I do think that if our chief is going to be talking, that it should be a joint meeting with both boards. It's a very important building to the community, and I think it's definitely worth having a common understanding of what's the path forward.
Does anyone else have anything?
Fine with
Michelle? You're cutting
being
out.
open to a joint meeting, with the understanding with the understanding that it probably is not going to occur until 2021.
All right, would you like to make a motion, or anybody like to make a motion? I'm sorry, Cyrus, you've got something to say, sorry.
We could just reach consensus to come back to this once the fire board is ready to move again. That is one option if we don't.
Would we be tabling it for consideration at a more appropriate time?
I think that's the best thing. Like I said, I don't want to pressure the other board if they first want to go through their thought process. But once they get back on it, that is probably the best time. That if they want to start having that information gathering, then that is when we say, let's just do it together and do it in one shot. So I guess the motion is to table and hear what, the fire board's decision and when they want to go through this.
I do have
That's my first thought.
I do have one question.
I don't want to create a tension.
No.
So I make a motion that we are open to the joint meeting pending the fire board, having decided they're ready to begin the process again.
I just have one question about Walt speaking at the other meeting. Bill, if you get a sense of the board that we don't want Walt at just a fire board meeting, is that enough for you? Do you need a board resolution, or is because he works for you?
I don't need a board resolution. I'm certainly glad to communicate that, and that would be my recommendation to this board also, is that would be a good time for both boards to hear from both chiefs. And I don't think it is necessarily a good idea for the police chief just to go to one. That's one board. That's exactly the kind of information we're trying to avoid.
Okay. All right, Cyrus, sorry, you want to restate that motion?
I guess so. I move that we are open to the joint meeting pending when the fire board is ready to begin the process again. So we give them the breathing room they deserve as the landlords, and they say once we're back on this, we'll join in and we'll just have this together.
I'll second that motion.
All right, let's take a vote. Rochelle?
Yes.
Eileen?
Yes.
Cyrus?
Aye.
Sylvia?
Aye.
And I say yes as well. All right, I have nothing. It's passed. Great. All right, next item is a presentation from me and Vice President Sheriff Swat about the pathways and consider possible board action and or direction to staff. And let me see, we also have a special guest tonight if he's still around, John Joya. I'm going to promote him to panelist. If I can find
He's
him.
here. He's got his hand up.
There he is. Great. That's the way to do it.
Silly dog.
Hi, John.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us.
Been watching, yes.
Yeah, thank you for hanging in there. Great. So what I'm going to do is give the path presentation, and then John will correct me if I'm wrong on anything, answer any questions, and then we can have public and board discussion on this. Let me just recap. I think most people know that I talked about creating this presentation in the last meeting, And it's really about people coming to our meetings for a number of years and asking about if we could do something about the paths, expressing desire that we or someone else take ownership of them. And it's been going on a long time, but when people started saying that they wanted to use them as evacuation routes, I thought that it deserved a better and more closer look at it, and thought it'd be best to look into what's happened up until now, give a kind of an up-to-date presentation, and let the board at least decide if they want to make any decisions and take it on. So I'm going to share this, hopefully this will go right, share my presentation. And I kind of lose. All right. Can everybody see that? Can I get can someone tell me if they can see that?
Yes, yes, I can see.
Okay, good. Well, Kensington Paths, Rochelle and I put this together.
Yes.
It's not meant to be completely comprehensive, kind of a recap. And as I made reference to in this presentation, there was an ad hoc committee created that really did a lot of work in investigating the past, and that was part of the agenda packet that you should have. So some definitions. For the purpose of this presentation, the path means a set of walkways in Kensington that have no clear owner and connect various streets. And this is a set of paths that was identified by the Path Ad Hoc Committee. And I say this because there are some maps out there that identify other paths, and I'm not saying which is right or wrong, but the focus of this is about the paths that don't have an owner, and people want to clarify that and maybe change that status. So that's why the definition of a path for this presentation. And here's a paths map, and this was updated from the original Path Ad Hoc Committee report. Their report is kind of a really hard to read black and white Xerox, so I just created a little color one, but it keeps the numbering system so you can refer back to the Ad Hoc Committee report. And that's the main reason for cross-reference. All right, so the history. Probably a lot of people know this. So the paths were originally part of the development of Kensington. And the paths were offered to the county by the developer. The county never accepted the offer. The developer doesn't exist anymore, so ownership is in kind of a nebulous state. I did find out in 1989, Contra Costa County annexed part of Kensington and created Zone 21, and they added that to an existing landscape and lighting district. And annex is the language that they used, so that might be contextual a bit. Kensington property owners are still assessed a yearly fee for paying for this maintenance. And what that district does now is maintain the median landscape along Arlington-Calusa, but originally the district did include the Kensington pathways, at least for maintenance. And according to the correspondence I could find, the maintenance of the paths was to be directed by the KIC. I'm assuming to be performed by the county under the direction of the KIC, kind of on a yearly overview. At some point, and it was actually 1995, the county wrote to the KIC and they expressed a legal opinion that the county never intended to own the paths and does not own the paths, since obviously the issue of ownership started to come up. And they also wrote that they intend to delete the maintenance of the paths from Zone 21. And they did that, and since then the paths have been maintained by volunteers. For the KPPCSD board, they created an ad hoc committee in 2011 to look into the paths. The committee presented the report at the January 12th, 2012 meeting. And at that meeting, the board passed a motion to acquire the Highland Path, along with the desire to eventually acquire all the paths. And about a year and a half later, at the October 16th, 2013 meeting, Paths Committee reported that acquiring the Highland Path wasn't easy. It was not that easy. And the board should consider acquiring an alternate path. Again, their idea was to start with one path and then acquire more along the way. They also reported that the issue of the path is complicated. Obviously, It was over a year and a half and they didn't make a lot of headway. And since then, no action has been taken, and no KPPCSD board has taken up the issue on an agenda, at least until now. Current owners, which is obviously one of the big questions. No one seems to want to admit they own the paths. I have to admit, when I first heard about the paths, and I think most people, when they get into it, they just assume, well, if nobody owns it, the county owns it, because by default, the county essentially controls Kensington if we don't explicitly take over something. But as I've discovered, it's not that simple. It seems that they really have no clear owner. There has been some past efforts to convince the county to accept ownership, given the language of the Zone 21 creation, but the county has been clear they don't own the paths and they don't want to own the paths. There might be some valid claims to partial ownership by some property owners who have built on the paths, and Anne might be able to speak to that a bit more, but that's brought up often in discussion about what to do about the paths. Besides ownership, there's liability that people have brought up is one of the considerations for the paths. On December 3rd, 2014, someone injured themselves on the Ardmore path. They sued a number of entities. Eventually, a settlement agreement was executed in June 20, 2017. Our board paid $4,000. The KIC paid $18,500, and a private homeowner paid $2,500, which was a total of $25,000, which is kind of an interesting number. I mean, I don't know if that's coincidence or not. You'll see later. There's also something else that I found, and this is just what I know. There's could be others, but this is what I found. 2016, there's a drainage pipe underneath the Highland Path that appeared to cause drainage issues with an adjoining property. An examination of the pipe showed that it was failing. Property owner contacted the county to try to get them to accept responsibility for the problem and repair the pipe. The county, they repaired the pipe. I say they accepted responsibility. I actually, now that I say that, I'm not sure if they explicitly accepted responsibility, but they did repair the pipe. Current liability issues. Because there's no clear owner, liability is really what someone wants to sue for. I talked to the SDRMA, that's our liability insurance provider, and they say because no one has claimed ownership, there's no explicit liability, but of course, you can sue anybody for anything, as we know, and that's, as shown in the past, there is a liability. Certainly anybody, this is according again to the SDRMA, anybody currently maintaining the paths exposes them to liability, and that's probably why the KIC bore the brunt of that settlement. If the KPPCSD would be a path owner, what are the potential liabilities? Or really any new owner. And an important concept is dangerous condition on public property. I've seen a couple of presentations at CSDA conferences. Essentially, if you've got a dangerous condition on public property, you've got something to worry about. Now, there are some exclusions. Let's say you've got a unpaved path and that you own, and a pothole develops in it, and someone trips and falls. Now, if you didn't know about the pothole, and it's an unpaved path, you essentially have an exclusion for being liable for that condition because you didn't know about it. Now, once you've been noticed that it's there, you are liable. So it's not you're forever free of liability. It's just that if you didn't know about it, and again, it's an unpaved path, you've got kind of a one-time exclusion. Although, again, it has to go to court, and who knows what could happen, but that's per the government code. Now, for a paved path, that's not the case. A paved path, to get that kind of liability, has to meet certain conditions. One of them is potentially connecting to recreation areas. Now, these paved paths in Kensington are more used for foot traffic. They connect streets. So according to the SDRMA, they wouldn't be eligible for that liability if we don't know there's a dangerous condition on that property. They did say that they have been able in certain cases to argue in court that the liability or the exclusion exists. So it's a little unclear, but in general, if they're paved, you've got to look after them and know what's going on. Again, we have paved and unpaved paths here. Now, as far as ADA requirements, according to the SDRMA, they don't apply to recreational footpaths. Now, calling those recreational footpaths is nice, but if they're really paths for transportation, I'm not sure if the ADA requirements would come into play. It's a little vague. I wasn't quite sure. Actually, I asked our SDRMA representative to come to this meeting. She was out of town. If this board or any board actually wants to explore it further, I'm sure that they'd be willing to come and speak in person. But I did spend enough time with her to get some pretty clear answers. They did say that if the paths are designated as evacuation routes, they would need to comply with the ADA. And that's an important concept. And they also said that the paths should be inspected seasonally, especially after big storms, periodically during the year. If someone complains to the district about the path being in damaged or dangerous condition, we'd have to repair it timely. Again, we would be noticed, even if they don't hurt themselves. If we've been noticed that there is a dangerous condition, we can't ignore it. And there's no exclusion of liability in that case. All right, options for the paths. And I just wrote down some. Obviously, keep the status quo. Add them back to the landscape and maintenance zone 21. Somebody acquires ownership. And of course, I'm sure people can come up with a number of other options. And I'll just go through those three options. Keeping the status quo. One of the issues is the liability is unclear, as we've seen. There's some blocked paths, and I think if you've got blocked paths, that there's some unresolved issues or somebody's not happy about something. Funding for maintenance and improvements are not consistent. You don't have for instance, a landscape maintenance district where you can get yearly fees. You might have to do fundraising, grants, but there's no guarantee that that money's always going to be there. If the paths are just to be used as occasional recreation, then I would think the status quo is probably acceptable to some residents. I know I use them occasionally. They're not perfect, but if you're just going to walk once in a while between streets, I think a lot of people will probably say, yeah, that's not, we could deal with that. It's been that way for a long time. But if that's of course just an opinion. If the paths are to be used as evacuation routes, then certainly they need to be upgraded and maintained. And it's a whole nother level of consideration if you're going to be calling them evacuation routes. So that means that the status quo is probably not acceptable in that case. Adding the paths back to zone 21. Theoretically simple, I imagine. They're originally part of zone 21. You wouldn't need to change ownership, but again, the county never really claimed ownership. They were just maintaining them. So the issue of ownership would still be around. Probably have to increase the yearly assessment because certainly the fees are not covering that right now. You need an agreement on who's responsible for maintaining the paths. And if they're going to be used for evacuation routes, again, that brings it in a whole other level. And that wasn't the original intent of putting the paths into zone 21. It really was for recreation. And since the county, and I'm sure John will have something to say about this, but they're the ones that wanted to remove the paths in the first place, it's not likely they'd really be interested in getting them back in there. Possibilities for new ownership. The county takes ownership, the KPPCSD takes ownership, the Fire Protection District takes ownership, or a private entity takes ownership. This is important steps needed to acquire the paths for any potential owner. We would want to, anyone would want to see a verification of the original offer of dedication, make sure that really did exist. You have to survey the paths. You have to appraise the paths. You want to get comprehensive title reports to make sure you understand the easements, ownership, everything around them. You'd have to have some CEQA reports, and you'd have to resolve any property owner claims. So there's quite a lot of steps. And if our board wanted to acquire them, in addition to those steps, we'd obviously need a board buy-in. I think we'd want to get public buy-in. We certainly want to get an estimation of acquisition costs. So the SDRMA said our coverage premiums wouldn't go up yearly. That would just be part of our blanket coverage. But we do have a $25,000 deductible for each liability claim. So it's not free. And of course, any kind of a liability claim involves staff time, and we have to pay our legal counsel. That costs money. So there are potential costs there. It's also important, we probably have to revise our district charter. The original charter didn't mention paths. It was really a park and some other things. But as I read it, and I think the Paths Committee brought this up as well, we'd probably have to get approval from LAFCO. And given that the Parks Recreation District was created by a public vote, we probably need a public vote to revise the charter. Now that I could be wrong on that, LAFCO and Ann might have an idea, but to me, that looks like it would be necessary. And that was also brought up in other correspondence. So the next steps. And I think it's important to ask, what problem are we trying to solve? Often people have just said, well, we should have public ownership of the path. But that doesn't really solve anything. Just because somebody owns it doesn't mean they're going to take care of it. And in fact, if you force someone to own it and they didn't want to own it, they probably wouldn't be a very good steward of the path. So it's not that I think people just want public ownership. They want to have someone to own it and to maintain it and to make improvements probably. And if the goal is to use them as evacuation routes, as I said, it brings up a whole new level of considerations and what needs to happen. And if we, or actually any entity, own the paths, what would the public expectations be? Do they expect them to be renovated, maintained pristinely, just kept as they are with a couple of improvements? So we'd have to know that as well. So that's my presentation. It's a lot of information, but I will now stop my share and come back to reality. Okay, here I am. Before I answer any questions, John, why don't you, any comments,
sure,
clarifications, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll make a few comments, having dealt with this for many years now, and thanks for your efforts at bringing this back and trying to look at this thoughtfully. And as you know, this issue was taken up by your board back in 2012, 2013 as well. In my time on the Board of Supervisors, we've had contact from residents in Kensington, including by KIC, about making the paths more usable. You talk about what's the sort of goal. I think, and I'm sure you'll hear from speakers, there are a number of Kensington residents who value the paths and would like to see them in a condition where they can be used. Maybe not all of them, maybe certain identified paths. And then the recent discussion came up about whether it should be an evacuation route. But even before that, there was a lot of, there's been a lot of support over the years. In fact, in the history books about Kensington that KIC has produced, there's been always discussion about the paths and their popularity. So a little history. So I have seen Public Works and our county council have all seen, there's many years ago, decades ago, when many of the developments were built in Kensington, the developer offered for dedication to the county the paths. The county decades ago did not accept that offer of dedication, which means that at that time the developer maintained ownership of the paths. So in reality, there is an owner, we just can't find it. The owner is the successor in interest to the original developer, whoever that may be, and that's probably impossible to find. It's been decades. So that's the reality. The successor in interest to the developer would be legally entitled to own the paths, but we don't know who they are. The other thing that's important, I think, to know is the paths may not today be in the exact same location as identified in the offer of dedication. You know, there's been change in slope and landscape. Adjoining property owners may have expanded their yard into some of the paths. So any attempt to move forward would involve most likely a survey of where the paths are now, because the last thing you want is if you took the original offer of dedication and said those are the paths and we want to figure out who can publicly own those paths. The path today may be partially in somebody's yard. So you do a survey. By the way, the county may have some funding to be able to assist in doing surveying if you decided to move forward. The other thing I think it's important to know, it's not an all or nothing proposition, right? At the discussion back in 2012, the idea was to take one or two paths on and try that out. In fact, the reason the county repaired the drainage of the Highland Path wasn't because it accepted responsibility for it. It was because it was, in that case, and I was involved in that, wanting to fix that problem because that was the path that that your board was thinking of taking on. So the county wanted to fix that problem if your district was going to take on that path, so that you wouldn't have that issue to deal with. Like many issues, right? I understand there's risk analysis. You own parks and you operate a police department. Both of those have risks and liability issues. Paths have some liability issues, although in a lot of the research that was done over the years and looking at other communities, like the Berkeley paths, for example, there was found to be very few claims. So something I'm sure you would spend more time looking into. I think the Berkeley path, there was some research done. Again, this is a number of years ago that really came up with the conclusion that claims were few and far between. The issue of, right, what is the cost to bring the paths up to some state that makes it passable, and what's your goal? What would they be used for? And then what's the ongoing maintenance for those? I do believe that if there's public ownership, it is better to have it be closer to the community and the residents, which means one of the local districts in Kensington. The county has not taken on ownership anywhere around the county of paths that may exist where it did not accept the offer of dedication. And I'll make an analogous situation. There are some developers, that these are older subdivisions. Some of this is at El Sobrante, who built houses and then didn't build the streets in front of those houses up to whatever the standards were at the time. And the county and cities have basically standards that say they will accept an offer of dedication if the street meets certain standards. If they don't meet standards, they don't accept them. There's streets around this county that many cities and the county don't accept ownership because they're not built to a standard. Is that what happened back here with the paths? Who knows? Before all of us were around. So, and with regard to this landscape and lighting district, which is basically only about $13 a year per household, there's not enough funding to do what it's supposed to do now and to take on paths. And as if you noted, if the county's not interested in putting that into the district because there's not enough money to do anything with the paths, with the $13 a year that's collected from each parcel in Kensington. You would have to raise the cost of that assessment. But I think, but really the bigger issue is there's some critical mass of community support to use the paths in some way that's safer than they are today, which means realistically some public entity would be responsible for doing that if they chose. And I do think you're going to have to figure out, or whoever is going to take them on, what's the cost of upgrading it to what level. I've always believed that the best approach is, if you're going to look at this, is to take one or two paths and start with that, and work with the constituency of Kensington residents who are interested in this issue and prioritize which paths folks are most interested in improving first. There are some paths that are probably further down the list that would be very hard to improve, and in some cases, some neighboring adjoining property owners have taken those paths over. You also probably want to start with a path where there are cooperative adjoining property owners. I know years ago when this was being looked at, there were clearly some neighboring property owners who were interested in having those paths be available, others who were not. So, I mean, I think it's about getting cooperation of those adjoining property owners as well. Frankly, if someone is injured today on one of those paths, probably everybody will get sued, right? They'll sue the neighboring property owner saying that they did something to affect that path. You know, they may sue the county, they may sue you, or someone else who's sort of taken on done some modification. Where that would end up, I don't know. As I say, there have been situations where neighboring property owners have changed the nature of a path and they may be held liable, for example, which is why some of them, I think, like the idea of having some type of public ownership. So, you know, I'll stay on, we can answer some questions. You know, I think the process part, if you decide this is something that makes sense to do, the process can be figured out. I wouldn't use the process as an obstacle. It's just, as a former land use lawyer, you can figure that out. It's just, in the counties, we are willing to cooperate to make that happen. No one's charging for the property. The cost is going to be, you know, your staff time basically to figure this out. As I say, we may have funding to help do the surveys. And whether it's a quiet title action or a quitclaim deed, I think our Public Works real estate section thought, well, maybe one approach would be, once you've done the survey and identified the path and identified two paths, that the county and the adjoining property owners could all do a quitclaim deed. But I think that can be overcome. The issue really is, again, identifying the paths that you want to prioritize. And I think that involves working with the pathfinders and other local residents, and really figuring out whether or not you want it to be used for evacuation or not. That may affect ADA issues, because I think we also heard back several years ago, ADA requirements don't need to be met if they're just recreational footpaths. There's a lot of historic interest over the decades, and glad you're taking a closer look at this.
All right, thank you. Board questions, Sylvia.
Yeah, hi, John. Thank you for joining us. I was very interested to hear about the landscape maintenance zone, because that's something I had not heard about prior to, about the paths. It seems honestly to me that there was a bit of a bait and switch there with the county, that they were originally included and then they were taken out. I realize it's not the funding right now to maintain them, but I guess if there was some agreement in Kensington to increase that assessment and include maybe not all the paths, but some of the paths in that, back in that assessment, is that even an avenue that we could talk about? One question. And the second thing I wanted to say, well, let's ask John, answer that first.
Yeah, and a lot of this was before my time. I don't know the original reason why it was put in the landscape and lighting district. It sort of predates me. Just, I can tell you, it doesn't mean that it's a totally separate issue from ownership, because even back then, it was acknowledged that the owner of those paths is the successor in interest to the developer, and it wasn't the county. I don't know why it was put in or even why it was taken out, but clearly at $13.66 a year, that's not sufficient even to do, you know, all the work that in the identified areas of the lighting and landscape district. I'm unaware again of the history of all of that. I don't believe there's interest in really putting it back in, because one, someone's going to pay, whether it's through the county or through you, someone's going to pay to maintain those paths. And it seems to me, if there is going to be some public ownership here, having it as close as possible to the people who are using it, to the community, is the best approach, which is your district, the fire district. Yes, admittedly, someone's going to have to maintain it, which ultimately means the residents. So whether it's done through a lighting district or through your mechanisms, it's still the residents paying for it. And
but
see what I'm saying? In other words,
yes, but the ability to manage and to actually affect the maintenance is clearly the county, as a much larger entity, has better, public works. We don't even have a public works. We're talking about little contracts for us that do maintenance. So cost wise, the county would have a better, value in being the arbiter and the kind of entity that would administer that, if there was in fact this gets away from the question of ownership, which I think is an actually interesting avenue. And Chris, you brought that up in your question. Like,
and can I ask you, who maintains your parks? Could you have you're currently responsible for maintaining your parks. So I'm wondering.
Bill can answer that, because he's found some deficiencies in how our contracts are working right now. So Bill, why don't you give John a little primer?
Presumably whoever maintains your parks could maintain the paths.
Yeah, it'll be set up by contract rather than direct staff maintenance, but there is a landscape maintenance district that provides partial funding for maintenance of the park.
And it's just one contractor, not super specialized, just very,
It's, I mean, you could do the same, right? I mean, although what makes the paths attractive is that there's this whole network of volunteers, which I'm sure you'll hear from, who've sort of taken on an interest in wanting to maintain the paths. So whoever owns them, if there's an ability to have this, the local volunteers do a lot of the maintenance. I mean, and that's where I hear the energy. The energy comes from residents who are saying, we're willing to volunteer. We're going to need someone to do some initial capital to bring these paths to whatever state they should be brought to, or again, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 paths to start, and we'll volunteer and help maintain those, and maybe that's supplemented. So whether it's your agency or the county, right, we each can have staff or folks who, in your case, contract, take care of the paths up to whatever standard. And ultimately, right, it's going to be the taxpayers or the residents that are going to pay for this, whatever cost it is, whoever owns it.
The point you brought up, Chris, is what are we trying to solve for? And I think, John, you've answered the question. I think a lot of us realize it's the real, I mean, people want to use them to a certain point, mostly to get from point A to point B more easily. And I guess the question is if people just decided that we wanted to contribute to the upgrade and maintenance of the park, I guess one question, because the issue of determining ownership does have a lot of expense involved, in the sense of the surveys, the time, there's a lot involved there. It can be worked out, but that does require some figuring out of things. I guess ultimately, do we even need to establish ownership if we didn't want to? And I'm just sort of playing a little devil's advocate here. Could we just agree that we want to get involved and help maintain them? Any entity, could be KPPCSD and or county, and not even deal with the whole question of ownership, and just work on paths that are, low hanging fruit? Or is the ownership question just really that important?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, I do think when one starts to become more involved with maintaining them, it improves them, it raises the liability issue, and then who ultimately is on the hook for if there's an injury, and then what's your relationship with the neighboring adjoining property owners? I think at some level you at least have to define what's the outline of the path. As I say, I think there is money that we may have to assist on the, and I could check back and see how much that would be to assist on the survey side, because that's going to take some effort, right? Is to survey. I thought it was easy as just you could accept the offer, county would accept the offer of dedication and then transfer it to you, because that's, but again, it may be a different location than what's on the offer, which is why you have to do the survey.
Well,
I need to extend the meeting, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm sure you'll hear from residents about, their voice about the vision that they see, because as you know, there's a pretty organized effort, and they're great, they're energetic, and I think hearing from them as part of this may help inform some of the discussion.
Do I have a motion to extend the meeting?
I'll make the motion that we extend the meeting to 10:15, another half hour, or should I go to 10:30?
I don't know, go to 10:30, might as well.
All right, we'll just extend to 10:30.
Yeah. Do I second?
I'll second.
All right. I'll take vote. Cyrus?
Aye.
Michelle?
Yes.
Sylvia?
Yes.
Eileen?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, so we extend the meeting to 10:30.
I won't say much more other than to say, Chris, I really appreciate the work that you and Rachel did on the presentation. You laid everything out really well. I've said over and over again that I would like to have some sense of what it would really take to bring these paths up to a certain standard, and really understand going forward if we were going to consider this as for us, what it would cost, because I think that's just a really big piece of the puzzle.
And one thing I'll say, I mean, what the previous board back in 2012 had looked at was taking on one or two of them. And so again, getting back to this, I don't think it has to be all or nothing, and you'll hear from residents how they feel, but taking on the highest priority one that's in the best condition or two and working with those, if you decide to do this, maybe, the most, thoughtful way to do this is it's not like you have to take them all on.
Rochelle, did you have something?
I did. I just wanted to reiterate John's point that if we work on the paths at all, we will probably immediately assume some kind of liability. I was involved in the lawsuit that took place, which ultimately we're talking about that the entities paid $25,000 for, but that lawsuit was originally for $1 million. So, if it had not been found basically all in our favor, I mean, it could have been a very, very expensive settlement. Now that would have come through our insurance, SDRMA, but we've got to consider that, there is liability issues and lots of different people, exactly what John said, everybody was sued. Everybody who had even volunteered kindly to improve the path was sued.
Anne, do you have a comment?
Yes, I do have a couple of points I'd like to make. First, I'm afraid that I think that it may be much more difficult to acquire the paths than has been presented. As Supervisor Goya pointed out, these paths may in fact have wandered off where they're shown on the original maps dating back who knows how long. And if that's the case, the county can't just accept them. Those paths are no longer within the area that was offered for dedication. So I don't think the county would have the ability to acquire and transfer them. Also, under some circumstances, an unaccepted offer of dedication can be considered abandoned if it is not used within a certain period of time. And I think that might have occurred here, although we don't really know. The maintenance issue, I can only underscore what's been said before. If you begin maintaining them, I think you have to plan on continuing to maintain them, whether you own them or not. You either have to commit to maintaining them to a safe standard or not. It is very true that there's an immunity for recreational paths, but it's up to the individual court to decide whether or not that immunity applies to these particular paths, which are after all not used so much as hiking trails as to get from one street to another. So I just wanted to make sure that the board was aware of those issues.
And Ann, what our county council and real estate division said is that if the surveys show that the paths aren't you know, partially in the original location, partially in other locations, that options could be a quitclaim deed or a quiet title action, and that a quitclaim deed would also be by the adjoining property owners, by the county, so that it just depends on what the survey shows.
It also depends on the owner's willingness. The owner may not want to quit if they've got their landscaped area.
Well, as I said at the outset, I want to really make this clear. I think if you look at this, you want to do it with paths where there are cooperating adjoining property owners. Where there's not cooperating property owners, it's going to be harder. And that's why back in 2012, I think the paths that were sort of selected at that time, at least, had adjoining property owners who were cooperative to the idea. And I think that you would want to do that here. Then you don't have an issue because everybody's in agreement.
Yeah, I agree.
Eileen, did you have something?
Yeah, when we attended the CSDA annual meeting and the talk, my understanding, and this goes to Ann's point, is that recreational paths are limited to paths going to a recreation area. And here we don't have any of the paths really doing that. The other thing is I heard that there might be easements, and I don't know if that was the issue with the Highland Path and the pipe, but I heard that some of these paths may have utility easements on them.
Yeah, I think that would be looked at in the survey. Again, you could choose the paths that make the most sense. I think again, there's so many paths there, and again, that gets back to the focus of which are the right paths to choose that have the least obstacles.
Sylvia, did you have something else? Or your hand's still up? Okay. Let's take some public comments before we, I guess as a board. All right, so we've got 10 attendees. If everybody spoke for 3 minutes, we'd totally blow this out. So I'm going to limit it to 2 minutes per public member, and if you can do it shorter, all the better. All right, Donna.
Hi, I'm Donna Stanson. I'm on a path. I see, you're scaring me with several things. First of all, on one side, I wish I had realized how much I could have widened my garage without any problem years ago when I needed to have 2 cars parked in a 1.5 size wide garage. But that said, I mean, I knew that, later learned when we were doing some work, that the paths had no ownership. The paths, I'm on a path that comes onto Windsor, through Windsor, and it has increased in number of people walking the paths considerably over, I don't know whether to say a year or 2 years or whatever, but it's been quite a increased number of walkers going up through that path. In the past, I know my husband, when he was around, available to do so, helped to make the path better, and now some other neighbors have taken on the job. It's scaring me when you say that if we improve the path, that makes us responsible. I am not. In fact, I had a neighbor telling me, insisting that she thought I owned the path, that it's in my home property owner or whatever, my deed, and it's absolutely not. But I'm concerned that I could potentially be liable, or as somebody that's beside a path when they trip and fall or whatever they do. I'm no longer, I can't maintain the path, but I know that other neighbors are and have done some considerable work, because there's a couple neighbors down on the bottom that goes down this path from me to the next street. Amazing work to make that path usable. And So that scares me. So about the liability, I'm actually, as now a widow, I don't really like the increased number of people walking up by my house. But it seems like it's okay. They don't, you know, and I guess I'm wondering what it means in terms of who would take on the ownership and getting it away from anything related to my having liability.
All right, that's what we're talking about. Thank you. All right, Elaine?
I don't have any comment. Thank you.
Oh, all right. That's quick. Rodney?
Hi, yes, you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Well, first I want to thank you, Chris and Rochelle, for your very thoughtful and serious analysis of this issue. It's great to see this board talking about this issue. And I want to say that I like John's suggestion that we would really start with, one or two paths and, kind of walk before you run. I think that's a really good idea. I want us to really think about like the cost of doing nothing. And it kind of goes to what Donna just said, like when we leave things in their current state, the liability goes to adjacent property owners like her. I actually, this past Saturday, we worked on the Ardmore path. And if you go on the Ardmore path, you'll see about 25 bags of clippings that we cleaned up. But, I'm being thanked for doing that by assuming the liability. And so you've really given volunteers a disincentive to take care of the paths if we leave them in their current state. And the paths are being encroached upon. They're not just going to stay in their current state if we do nothing. They're going to get smaller. They're going to be in a worse state. They can't be improved. We can't get grant money. And so that's why, I'm part of this Path Keeper group. That's why we have been pushing this issue. And we know, as you said in your article in the Outlook, it is a complicated issue. There is a lot of things we're going to need to do. Our group is really committed to working hard to figure out what we need to do to move forward on this. But I just want to think about, we can't just leave things the way they are. And we do need to be mindful of the fact that we're in a fire zone. I know it adds to the cost and complexity if we call them evacuation routes, but we've got all these people up the hill who need multiple options for escaping a wind-driven wildfire. And it's not hard to see how these paths could be very useful for that when our streets really kind of follow the contour of the hills, and the paths get people quickly down the hill to the Arlington and then down to Lower Kensington where they're going to be safer. So thanks again. Really great to see you guys taking this up.
All right, thank you. Kevin.
Chris, thank you. I want to thank John Joya for, as usual, always showing up and for asserting that whatever the community wants, he will go to the mat with. And thank you, Chris and Rachel, for putting together this terrific show, and to the Path Keepers for doing this. Personally, yes, I'm on the fire board. Yes, I'm on the Emergency Preparedness Committee. I'm speaking as a citizen. I don't care particularly about recreation and shopping for the paths. I care about evacuation. And I know that there are going to be times when an evacuation in the middle of the night is going to happen when there's smoke and it's going to be dark and it's going to be very hard to get down. But you know what? We need to throw everything possible at the problem of keeping people safe, in my view. The homeowners who have built over the path, who have instructed the paths, they have title insurance. Title insurance can be investigated to show whether they actually have the right to do this or not. If they have overhangs, if their property encroaches on this, then they're liable to fix this. And I think we should do this. We have a principle, thirdly, of sauve qui peut, That is, every man for himself. You have to be able to do this. There is no way we could make the path from Stanford down to Princeton wheelchair accessible. It isn't possible. So, in my view, no one should ever try to say this is an official evacuation route, but they should say, here is what you're getting into, and if you need a wheelchair, you cannot go down here. People have to do this. We are at the mercy of geology, and we have to take this at our own risk. It's really important to do this because we don't have these kinds of safety margins here. For Attorney Danforth, I would say that the factors here are not what you're talking about. They're about evacuation. And if they're about evacuation, it may be, and I don't know, it's your bailiwick, that some kinds of avenues to open up things will be more accessible than those if you just say, well, this is just for recreation or hiking or shopping. No, these are safety routes. And not everyone can handle all these safety routes because of the geological factors I just mentioned. But we should at least make a try at it. And honestly, this is an effort of all of us. And I think it's great to have this conversation. Thank all of you so much.
Right, thanks, Evan. Rachel Fay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, my name's Rachel Fay. I live on Ardmore Road and I grew up in Kensington. I'm 44 and went to Kensington Elementary School and spent my whole childhood walking home on the paths with my friends. And now my son does the same. I am a trail planner actually by profession, and I've been doing that for nearly 20 years and work with many public agencies to try to preserve and dedicate and design sustainable trails. And I currently work at a land trust in the peninsula doing this line of work too, protecting corridors for trails and protecting land for parks. So it's a little bit of my background. And I think what's really important from my perspective as a resident is that I think it's really important to solve for the major threat, which I don't see as liability. I see the biggest threat as protecting the future of the paths. I've seen some paths get encroached over my time living in Kensington and some that are no longer in existence. And what worries me most about the future of the paths is that if one landowner realizes from a meeting like this even that there's no ownership and that they could actually encroach on a path pretty simply in a linear corridor where there's multiple property owners on one pathway, and one property owner encroaching on it can threaten the future of any one of our paths. And so I really think the decision of the group here is to decide, are the paths important to us and do we want to protect them? And if the answer is yes, then I love what the supervisor said, which is that you can figure out the process and the how, but the decision is how important this is. A couple more thoughts is that there's already a liability that many parties carry, and even without being an owner of the paths, you've been parties have been sued, and I actually think there's less liability when you can own the paths and maintain them to guidelines that you agree to. And I would also encourage you to not maintain to standards, because there's actually more liability to maintaining trails to standards than there are to guidelines. So that's a little nuance there. So I would just encourage you to determine the process and later and right now encourage you to do whatever you can to protect the future of the paths. I think they are what create the character of our community. They're also an important aspect of improving the property values of our house, of our homes. And just because you take on ownership doesn't mean it requires you to upgrade every trail to a certain guideline or standard. It just means that you are protecting the future of the paths, and then you can go from there. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And I have to start getting strict about the 2 minutes, so excuse me if I jump in and cut you off. Well, at least tell you that your time's up. All right, Matt?
Hi, thanks. My name is Matt Friedman, and I'm a Kensington resident who lives on Coventry Road. I've been here for 3 years, and I love this community, and I plan to be here for a very long time. I really appreciate the presentation by Chris and the overview by John Joya. I love using the paths. I use it to take walks throughout the community. I use it to get to and from Tilden and Wildcat Canyon parks. I think that might support the formal designation of these routes as recreational footpaths, if that helps. It does seem like the alternative and making paths ADA compliant is a very heavy lift on a number of fronts. These paths are a really special feature of Kensington, and in my view, they need to be preserved and improved. And based on their current condition, it's clear that some additional improvements are going to be appreciated and necessary over time. Clearly, the conversation tonight brings out the concerns about liability issues, and the status quo just doesn't seem to be sustainable. I agree with John Joya that too many entities currently face potential liability. So we need to make sure that the paths can be upgraded and that improvements don't subject anyone to additional liability. Of the options that were presented, I think public ownership would be my personal preference. Certainly, if the county can be persuaded to take it over, that might be best for Kensington, but I do believe that Kensington should be ready to explore ownership as an alternative option. In addition, maybe a creative way to deal with this would be a nonprofit approach if somehow there's a specific legal or liability challenge with implementing a public ownership option. It's clear that clarifying the ownership would allow Kensington to harness the energy of all of these volunteers who want to provide free labor because they love these paths. But volunteering and efforts by nearby landowners shouldn't create new liability. We don't want to punish people for their good deeds. So we can't settle for the current state of affairs. And we shouldn't rely on the perpetual generosity of adjacent landowners to maintain the paths in good condition. So I really hope there's a way to move forward with this effort. Strongly support the board pursuing an exploration of all available options. And I am concerned that we just can't keep going with the existing situation. So I hope that there's good creative energy and a desire to take the next steps on this process. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Dave Weinstein. If I pronounced it right, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
I sent a few comments into your general manager, Bill Lindsay, so I don't want to repeat them. But I do want to say that for many years, Kensington has ignored these paths, as your very thorough report has shown. But now, with so much enthusiasm, these paths, which I don't think have been emphasized enough, are just beautiful things to walk on. They are really nice. They add a lot to the recreational value of the town itself. I do so much walking on the paths, walk by the houses. They're gorgeous. This is the time to really step up and try to preserve them forever, because if you don't, they could eventually go away. And the idea of liability and danger, El Cerrito, I'm the president of El Cerrito Trail Trackers. We have similar paths and trails. So does Berkeley, Oakland, Sausalito, Mill Valley. Most towns in the Bay Area that have any kind of hills have trails like this. They all manage to succeed with these trails, and Kensington can too. You have a lot of people in town who are really big on them. This is the time to step up and say, yeah, we want these trails. We want them to be here forever.
All right, thank you. Here's someone who knows a bit about the past, Linda. Oh, did I, there we go, Linda.
Hi, it's Linda from
Hi,
the
Linda.
Kensington. Did you get me?
You got it, go ahead.
All right. Linda Lipscomb here for the Kensington Improvement Club. In a way, I feel like I'm swimming upstream here because I'm very positive on this. KIC has hundreds of Kensington residents, and want to thank President Deppie, members of the KPPCSD board. Thank you for taking up this issue of acquiring the paths. It's long overdue. Supervisor Joya, we're thanking you for your interest in the paths as well. You've been on board so many times and you were really helpful to us in getting that Highland Canyon path problem solved years ago. For many years, KIC has sponsored cleanups and improvements of the paths. KIC Director Gretchen Gilfillan spearheaded the volunteer efforts, and Sylvia Townsend ably carried on with community volunteer help, especially through the Kensington Path Keepers group of volunteers that's in full force now. On October 26th, the KIC directors passed a resolution supporting formal acquisition of the Kensington Paths by a Kensington public agency. We delivered a copy of that resolution to President Deppie. I hope you got that. I'm sorry I only was able to bring it down yesterday, Chris.
I haven't seen it. I'm away right now, but I'll
Okay.
certainly.
Okay,
Thank you.
in brief, the resolution refers to a number of important considerations, including one, the prior motion of the KPPCSD in the year 2012 advocating the acquisition of the paths. Two, recognition of the paths as a valuable recreational feature of Kensington. We've heard a lot about that this evening. Three, the potential use of the paths as emergency evacuation routes in case of fast-moving wildfires, as indicated in the findings of the 2020 Kensington Evacuation Research Report of the Kensington Fire Protection District, conducted by the Institute of Transportation Studies of UC Berkeley. And four, the benefit of public ownership, which would allow access to grants and special funding sources in order to maintain and improve those paths. Based upon those points noted, the KIC resolution formally supports public acquisition of the paths. The resolution was adopted unanimously by the board after its presentation by the KIC Paths Committee, including Sarah Paul, Lisa Corona, and Sylvia Townsend. So please let us know the ways in which we might help as this effort goes forward. I would like to say one other thing to Anne. I was thinking about the prescriptive rights of the public. We've heard about so much interest, people going up and down, these paths, and people being irritated by it, people loving it. No, there is a great history of prescription here. It's true that there are formal methodologies of quiet title and perhaps some residual ability of the county to accept the offer of dedication and then transfer title to a public agency. Perhaps there's some form of declaratory relief that could be done. I mean, assuming we get these things scoped out. But there's also this enormous right by prescription. And for those who don't know, these offers of dedication, I'm sorry.
I really don't mean to cut you off, but there's a lot of people behind you.
I got you. Okay, thank you. KIC wants you to get these paths, maybe even one at a time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Andrea.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation and for the comments from Supervisor Joya. My name is Andrea Horbinski, and I've lived in Kensington on Amherst for several years now. Just to second and third the sentiments voiced already, that the current status quo I don't think is really sustainable, either in terms of the paths, the physical paths and being encroached on, or the situation where multiple parties are exposed to liability. And as we heard from this story of this 2014 lawsuit, which honestly sounds, $1 million claim sounds like a lot, the KPPCSD didn't escape liability in that situation either. So it's not like the current situation is, you won't pay anything if somebody else slips and falls. And I would second the idea that, maintaining them to guidelines would perhaps reduce potential for injuries. But yeah, just, as a resident, I think the paths are a really great way to get to and from Tilden. I also use them to get to and from the bus stop, as well as just for, recreation and walking around. And I would certainly urge the board to at least undertake this survey that Supervisor Joy mentioned about, seeing the current state of the paths, as opposed to just, looking on Google Maps and comparing them to 30-year-old diagrams. And at least taking that step forward to, ascertain the current situation and again, hopefully move towards public ownership of some form to preserve the past for the future. and for, again, potential emergency use as well, which I think the reality is that's, definitely a likelihood that we have to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa. Hello again.
Hello, this is my first time, but hello again to you.
No, well, I talk about, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, again, thank you for putting this on the agenda. It was really encouraging to have this issue come back to this board. I'm not going to repeat a lot of things that people have said. I do want to say that the paths in Kensington are one of the things that make it so unique and such a wonderful community, and that they are used by the public. They have historically always been used by the public. They were laid out for the public. The public has used them. There's a lot of testimonials that have been collected about people using these, and that some of them are getting blocked off is upsetting. That the resource is diminished and will someday disappear if there's no formal ownership. I think the issue for public ownership is so important because that will mean that they are open and public for. Once public ownership is established, nothing can take it away. That is the same for your park. And it's just really a fabulous concept that you'll be able to actually, if somebody puts up a fence in the future, you'll be able to actually enforce moving that fence because you will actually own it and you will be protecting the public good for perpetuity. So I think, right now this is an important issue in the community. It's important for recreation, for health, for climate, for walkability, for kids getting to school and back, and people shopping in a community. And there are people ready to work on this with the local agencies on the nitty-gritty details of what it takes. What are the standards that we want to build these to? What are the standards we can build these to? How much does it cost to repair them? How much does it cost to maintain them? I think we really put together a plan, a collaborative plan, and move this forward and take care of this problem that comes up every 10 years. I mean, this is not the first time a group has been pulled together. Pretty much every 10 years, every decade, you can say there's a whole other group that comes and tries to accomplish this goal. So I think we can get this done, and I think we can do it together and in partnership. And I would encourage the board to move forward incrementally to do that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Meryl.
Hi, I just want to add that, Kensington is exactly a prototype of paradise. We're so vulnerable to fire, and the paths actually are a real resource for our town to get out with fewer people dying in their cars. And talking with Brad Harms about emergency planning, I know that the police would like to be able to improve the paths, light the paths, put railings on the paths, so that if there is a nighttime evacuation, people will be able to safely exit. And so I totally support everything that everybody has said about moving forward to try to find a way to acquire the paths. The liability is already there. And as for the cost, in 2010, we passed a $200 per parcel assessment to keep our local police. Something similar could be done for the paths. I think they have as much importance as the local police. That's all.
Thank you. Nikki K. Is that Nikki Kaiser?
It is.
Hello.
Voice from the past.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to thank Supervisor Joya and Linda Lipscomb from the KIC for their continued support of our community in this matter. I am Nikki Kaiser. I am the same one who was on the committee back in 2011. And here we are, a decade down the road. Not a lot has changed. We had 2 items of progress in 2011 that were particularly helpful. We finally got some street signs so that our emergency services could identify the paths. If someone tripped and fell on them, or if a fire started on them, we could now finally say, oh my gosh, we know what path this is, because that was an amazingly big issue for some reason, naming the paths. And the other thing that happened kind of outside of the council was we have this thing called the Diablo Fire Safe Council, and they give out grants for brush clearance and whatnot. And I personally wrote a grant application for the Highland Path clearance. They gave us a grant, a significant one, for doing all the chipping work. All the volunteers did the cutting, but they paid for professional chipping of all that material, which was extremely helpful. And we could continue doing that on an annual basis if people were motivated to do it. We put a lot of time and effort into that report that we wrote because it was a very high priority for the community. These paths provide routes to school. They provide ease of access to the shops and the buses. It improves our walkability score, which frankly improves everyone's property values because that is a considerable thing in real estate these days. And the obvious issue of emergency egress, whether it's official part of our routes or not, the fact is people who know these are here will use them if they need to. The thing that people don't talk about as much is the importance of them as an ingress route for our fire department. In the event of a fire, they can bring hoses up these paths to houses, to the backsides of houses for all the neighbors along there. And it creates a really useful fire ingress, fire department ingress and access route for them. Everyone thinks about getting out. No one thinks about the importance of getting back in while all the cars are trying to go down the street. This was actually very actively used during the Oakland Hills fire and their similar paths. So it's not just a hypothetical. Those paths in Oakland saved houses, saved lives.
Vicki, I'm sorry, we're again, there's a lot of people behind you. Could you maybe summarize?
Well, I think we need to address the fact that we've had 4 red herrings that keep coming up every decade that we deal with this. One claims the county won't cooperate. That's obviously not the case. We need to stop pretending the county is a roadblock here. Supervisor Joya is fully on board with this, and we thank him greatly for his effort. The risk of injury, we've got 1 claim in over 100 years, not really a significant deal. The utility pipes are easements. They are the responsibility of the utilities. And the paths, the paths are clearly marked on the assessor's maps, more clearly than our sidewalks, and they're in no way part of the neighbors' parcels, despite a few folks' illegal encroachments on them. Most of the paths are clear. They're not in dispute. They haven't moved. They're right where we left them. We all walk down them every day and everyone knows where they are. There's a couple of issues, a couple of paths that are tricky, and we can deal with those at a later date. But let's move forward and stop pretending that this is an impossible issue to address. We can't kick it down the road another decade. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, someone else who knows something about the paths.
Hi, everybody. This is Mark.
I'm sorry, Mark. I need to. Yeah, sorry. We're running up against a meeting limit.
I will make a motion that we extend the meeting till 10:45.
All right. I'll second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry, Rochelle. I jumped in and seconded. So let's take a vote. Sylvia?
Aye.
I vote yes. Eileen?
Yes.
Cyrus?
Aye.
Rochelle? I didn't hear you. I'm sorry, Rochelle.
Oh, yes. So
Okay, so we're extending the meeting to 10:45. So again, Mark, now you're 2 minutes. Wait a second. Go ahead.
Very good. Can you hear me?
I'm here. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Mark Allenberg. Thank you, Chris, for taking up this and presenting such a nice, thorough presentation of the paths and the issues. And thank you, John Joya, for being here and expressing your experience in the paths, because you've held this role for a long time as kind of a supporter of the paths and this idea of moving this forward. I just want to be real quick and say we've been living on a path known as path number 9 or Beloit path for 38 years. And we've taken upon ourselves at some risk to improve that path and light it and put steps in so that people can use it. And I can tell you that the community uses that path heavily, up and down all day, every day. It's for getting places around Kensington on foot, which is a nice way to travel. Not only does it get you out of your car, but it gets you meeting people face to face. And it's a community connector. It really connects our community in many ways. And I think what you're hearing here is a lot of enthusiasm for the paths and people wanting to move forward to get ownership so that we can have liability that's centrally managed and work on improving these paths over time. There's a lot of complexities, but we can do it as a community, and I think you're hearing that enthusiasm. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thanks, Mark. All right, Susan and Paul Moss.
Yeah, this is Paul.
Hi.
I live on Lake Drive, Kensington, and I'd like to follow up on the comments of several speakers before me about evacuation. And I just want to briefly use one example of a Kensington path to emphasize what I consider the importance and also the clear advantage of having these pathways, given the geography of the area we live in. If you take a look at the path map that's on top of the superimposed on top of the street map in Kensington, you'll see there's a Princeton path. I believe it's called number 7, very short one, maybe a couple hundred feet, I think, since you can't get to it, between Amherst and the Arlington. It's closed because it's blocked off and not maintained, and apparently, and I want to emphasize the word apparently, I don't know the whole story behind it, but apparently it has to do with one resident living alongside of that particular path that essentially took advantage of the fact that there wasn't any ownership of it and made the path essentially not only unusable, you can't really even tell it's there anymore, although apparently it is if you get by the shrubbery and everything right in front of it. If you take a quick look at that map, and again, where it is running between Amherst and the Arlington, it's closed again, very straight path down to the Arlington. If it were maintained and open, it would provide a really short, quick exodus down to the Arlington from Amherst. If you don't have it, which is the situation right now, take a look at what the alternative walk down is. You have to go on Amherst, either north or south, about 5 times that length. I'd say something close to 1/10 of a mile. If the path were in place, to go back to that argument, and you look at the top of the southeast part of Kensington, you'll see that that would make a straight line using the Beloit path all the way from Grizzly Peak, using Beloit as a street, then connecting with the Beloit path, and then this path, people would have a straight line down to the Arlington. And of course, I don't need to remind anybody that the shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight path. It sort of mirrors what you have on Willamette to the north. So I'd just like to emphasize that I think these paths need to be maintained and open. And I think this will only happen with clear ownership and responsibility. And sure, I also believe in the paths for recreational purposes. I use them like that. But to me, that's a nice to have. But for evacuation, it's something a lot more than that.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Kyra Milich.
Hi, this is Kira Milich,
Oh, sorry.
and that's okay, happens all the time. I live at the base of public path number 3 on Coventry, just below Arlington. And I have multiple sclerosis, so I drag my foot. I use that path all the time, but it is difficult to walk on and it needs a lot of maintenance. And I don't know if a contractor that keeps up the park will actually be able to do the work that needs to be done on that path. I agree with everything that everyone has said, and I just have a question. As a fundraiser for a nonprofit, I wonder if, I don't know if Kensington Pathkeepers Association does more than clean and maintain the paths, for which I'm incredibly grateful, as well as the associated landowners, I'm sorry, neighbors of the paths. But is there any movement for starting a nonprofit that could actually stay on top of all the things that need to be done in order to get grants and have maintenance and work with the county and other agencies and write grants? Is there something like that that exists or that can exist? I would be very interested in being a part of that think tank if it exists. And I just don't know if this already exists with the Pathkeepers Association. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would suggest contacting the Pathkeepers directly, because they could answer that much better than I. I think Julia might have just kicked you off accidentally. So let me, Julie?
Sorry, Chris, to jump in. Oh,
Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, is it Julie or is
I
it
was,
Michelle?
sorry,
Michelle wanted
Julie.
to say
can I-
something.
No, I'll be
I just
quiet.
wanted to offer,
Michelle, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's Kensington Path. That's all.
KensingtonPathKeepers.org, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Julie, go ahead.
I'll be very quick. Thank you. First, I wanted to thank the comments of my neighbor, Rachel Fay on Ardmore. People may not know that her father, Ron Eggerman, was a very prominent member of the fire board quite a few years ago, and I thank Rachel's involvement. I also wanted to thank Nikki Kay for her comments, in particular about the Diablo Fire Safe Council and the brush clearing effort that the fire board provides matching grants for. There's a very substantial public education opportunity that can accompany this effort to highlight visibility of the paths, which I really appreciate. And a very visible example is that recently and very quietly, a very huge patch of juniper was removed from the base of the Ardmore path at the path and Ardmore Road. So when we talk about these paths for evacuation, we should also be aware of the challenges of juniper and other brush that would make them more dangerous for evacuation. And I hope we can emphasize the public education opportunity of the matching grants that the fire board offers so that we can have a community partnership to make us all safer in this regard. And I really appreciate, that you've put this on the agenda. And finally, just kind of a niggly little point of clarification. The traffic study that the fire board conducted was not actually conducted by the Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Berkeley. It was conducted by 3 individuals who were working on their master's degrees there, but they were independent student consultants and they did a wonderful job. But it was not an effort of UC Berkeley. It was an individual consulting effort, but they still did a wonderful job. So thank you.
All right, thank you. One more, Carol.
Hi, my name is Carol Alf, and I live at the base immediately adjacent to path number 3, which is Stratford Path. And I really appreciate this discussion. My family has lived next to the path since 1962. So I traveled the paths as a child and as a teenager, and now I use them every day as an adult. So I really feel that they are important for many reasons. And when we talk about the direct line, I can get from my house up to the Arlington, the stores at the Arlington, in about 4 minutes. And if there were an issue, I just think of the people coming down the hill in an event of an emergency, having to wind their way through Coventry Road and whatnot to get to the bottom of the hill. So I think they're very valuable. If we do have the opportunity to look at acquiring the paths, I hear frequently people saying that they would start with 1 or 2. So I'm hopeful that if that opportunity presents itself, that we also create a plan to look at acquiring the rest of them as well. So it's not just a couple. I know some of them might be very difficult because I know some have been acquired by neighbors. I remember we used to travel those as children and now they're no longer accessible. But for those paths that are still primarily in their original condition, to also have a plan to acquire those as well and not just 1 or 2. That was all.
All right, thank you. All right. Thank you, public members.
Chris?
Yeah, we're, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna, listening to all this say, I mean, both you and Rochelle have done a lot of good work summarizing this, and it's really still the tip of the iceberg, right? Because there's so many issues. There's been a lot of institutional knowledge and a lot of detailed knowledge by folks at KIC and Pathfinders. And what could make sense, because this, I know this, it's a late hour and there's, you know, a lot of discussion here, is maybe forming a work group that includes, you know, a couple of you, that you designate. I'm glad to have my office participate, KIC, Pathfinders, maybe somebody from the fire district, that's up to you, to sort of have a work group that maybe delves into more detail on some of the issues that came out tonight, building on the presentation from 2012, your presentation, some of the other material that's out there, and sort of address some of the issues that have been raised, and that way we're bringing in others who have some good knowledge that can help us, you know, come up with sort of at least some options. What does this look like? So that's just a thought for discussion, and I am willing, and obviously I bring, you know, the county support with regard if we had to look up some legal issues with our county council or our real estate division to support it through our office.
Thank you, John. Rochelle?
I was going to suggest, Chris, that you and I synthesize what we've heard tonight and come back to the board in December with a list of options that we can agree to at that time, because it is so late.
Okay, I think that's fine.
With a timeline for everybody and what we're thinking, so that the board can vote on it.
I think that's a good idea, right? And maybe work a little bit more with Ann and possibly the fire chief about getting better clarity on what evacuation routes mean, because that's my big concern, is that, and you start talking about evacuation routes and it's a whole other level. But yeah, I think that's good. If you're willing to work with me, we can bring it back and have another presentation, or at least a summary presentation on the December meeting.
Yeah, because we've had so much good information tonight that it's really helpful.
Yeah. So should we just table this and bring it back in December? Would that be appropriate?
Well, it was just a for discussion item, right? And then we just,
right,
at that time, could bring in something with action.
So we really don't need to have a table. We can just have another discussion item with the next agenda. Okay. So we can agree to do that, and don't
If
think
you
we
need
need
more from us or the county, let me know.
Okay.
Thank you so much, John, for everything. It's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you everybody who stuck around and gave comments. It really did help to hear that. So then I'm assuming we don't really need to take any more action if it's going to just show up on the next agenda. Is that right? Everybody okay with that?
Yes, thanks.
All right. Well, thanks everyone again for sticking around. And John's gone already, but I'll tell him thanks again. All right. I'll declare the meeting over.
Wait, one question.
Okay, go ahead.
The emails from the county, those I'm assuming are public records. And at least SDMRA emails do the rest of the board get to see? Because the one thought that always comes to mind with SDMRA is that their official opinion or just their tentative opinion.
I'd have to find out if that's a legal opinion that's protected or not. I'll have to talk to Ann about that.
I mean, like, even just for the board to know what SDMRA said, like,
well, again, I'd have to,
I'm assuming is public. I mean, even internally, the board for the SDMRA stuff.
I'd have to find out from Ann. I'm assuming there's no problem with it, but let me just check with Ann. The county is from a file that they'll lent me, and it may be public, but I certainly don't have permission to publish any of that. So I'd have to find out from the county, but it's background information that seems everybody agree upon. So I don't think there's anything controversial in there.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm just kind of curious what the actual discussions were within the source material.
The discussions were mainly a Zoom call with Lisa and Mark.
Oh, I mean the historical emails.
That you'd have to talk to the county about what they released or not. You know. John would know that better than I. I mean, it's public, but public is not necessarily something that I have the permission to publicize, if you know what I mean.
or like even if the board has a chance to. But yeah, I'll leave that to asking the county. Just was curious.
Okay, I'll talk to John also.
Well, if we can put together then with our options, Cyrus, I think what you're asking is as much supporting material
Yeah.
you'd like published along with it. That's no problem. I haven't seen some of these things firsthand either. It's just so we can figure out how those things get
Yeah.
published.
I'll find out from John what can be made sort of in a general public sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, fine. Okay, well then,
Okay, good
thanks
night.
everybody.
Thank
Anything
you.
else? No, all right.
No, stay safe. Have a good Thanksgiving because we won't.
Right. Oh, yeah.
That's right. No, see
Thanksgiving,
everybody in December. It'll be a brand new world.
Good night.
All right.
Stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Bye.
Well, thank you.